This is for you, my shining light. May it make your journey a little happier." The compass was, by any reasonable measure, the ugliest thing Maret had ever stolen. And she had stolen a great many ugly things. A bronze bust of a duke whose nose had been broken off and replaced with clay. A painting of a horse that, the longer you looked at it, seemed less like a horse and more like a dare. A silver music box that played one note, repeatedly, with the haunted persistence of a man who had forgotten the rest of the song but refused to admit it. Maret had a gift, some might call it a curse if they were being uncharitable, which most people were, for acquiring objects that nobody else wanted and then discovering, too late, exactly why nobody else wanted them. The compass came from a dead man's coat pocket. This was not as macabre as it sounds. The man had simply left his coat on a tavern chair while he went to use the facilities, and Maret had helped herself to the contents of his pockets on the reasonable philosophical grounds that unattended property was essentially public property, and she was a member of the public. It was brass, dented on one side, and the face was scratched so badly that 3 of the cardinal directions were illegible. She could make out the N, at least. The needle wasn't pointing at it. The needle wasn't pointing north at all. It was pointing southeast, toward the docks roughly, or possibly toward the fishmonger's stall, which Maret supposed could also be considered a kind of tragedy. She shook the compass. The needle swung wildly, considered its options, and settled back to southeast. "Broken," she told it. The compass did not respond because it was a compass. She pocketed it anyway because it was shiny, and shiny things had a way of becoming valuable if you found the right kind of fool. She had, in her 12 years of professional theft, discovered that there were many right kinds of fools, and that the world manufactured them in impressive quantities. She did not follow the needle that night. She followed it the next morning entirely by accident, because southeast happened to be where the bread market was, and Maret had not eaten since yesterday, and the body, it turned out, had opinions about that. The bread market led to a road. The road led southeast. Compass, Maret noticed with growing unease, pointed with an unusual steadiness. Most compasses wavered. This one did not waver. It pointed the way a finger points when someone is trying to make a very serious point and they want you to know it and they are not going to let it go. She asked a farmer where the road went. "Southeast," he said. "Yes, I can see that." "What's southeast?" He considered this with the tremendous gravity of a man who had never considered it before. "More road," he said finally. "And then, I think, more southeast." This was not helpful. Maret thanked him anyway because she had found that thanking useless people cost nothing and occasionally resulted in them offering you a ride on their cart, which this one did, which saved her 3 miles of walking, so she supposed the system worked. She rode southeast. The compass needle did not move. By midday, she was past the farmlands and into territory that had the tired, forgotten quality of places where things had once happened, and then stopped happening and never quite recovered from the disappointment. There was a battlefield here, or had been. She could tell by the way the grass grew wrong, thick and dark in patches, the way grass grows when it's been fed well and doesn't want to think about what it was fed. There were no bodies. There were, however, a great many stones arranged in rows, which amounted to the same information. The compass pulled her to the eastern edge of the field, where a broken wall still stood, half swallowed by ivy. Maret stood in front of it and felt the specific discomfort of a person who is not certain why they have come somewhere but is increasingly certain that they have in fact come somewhere. She checked the compass, still southeast. "Fine," she said to nobody. "We're not done." She kept walking. The town of Brecken's Hollow had not been a thriving community for some time, and it wanted you to know it. The buildings sagged with the posture of people who had given up on good news. The sign at the entrance had lost most of its letters and now read BRNHLW, which was either the town's name or an expression of how its residents felt. The well in the square had a bucket but no rope, which struck Maret as a metaphor, though she was too hungry to work out what for. There was, remarkably, a tavern still open. Maret went in and ordered whatever was cheapest, which turned out to be a broth that she suspected had begun its life as washing water and had simply been allowed to develop ambitions. She put the compass on the table. It pointed, not toward the door, not toward the road, but toward the back wall of the tavern, where an old woman was sitting alone with a cup of something that steamed in a suspicious color. The old woman looked up. She had the eyes of someone who had watched a great many people make a great many mistakes and had long since stopped finding it interesting. "Got Callum's compass," the woman said. "I don't know any Callum, but you've got his compass." She said it without accusation, which was somehow worse than accusation. "Come sit." Maret sat, because the broth was bad and she had nothing better to do, and because people who spoke with that kind of certainty were either going to tell you something useful or something devastating, and either way it was worth knowing. The old woman's name was Dava. She had lived in Brecken's Hollow for 40 years, which Maret found remarkable on the grounds that she could not imagine wanting to live in Brecken's Hollow for 40 minutes. Callum had been her brother. He'd made the compass himself, she said, with a strange alloy he'd traded for from a tinker who passed through in the spring. The tinker had told him it would point true. Callum had assumed this meant north. "It didn't point north?" Maret asked. "It pointed at him," Dava said. "Wherever he went eventually it would turn and point back at him. He thought it was broken. He tried to sell it. Nobody wanted it." She paused. "Then he left it in his coat at a tavern." Maret put down her spoon. "Your brother left his coat at a tavern. He was a very nervous man. Where is he now?" Dava looked at her with the patience of someone who had expected this question. "He followed the compass," she said. "Before he lost it. It pointed southeast for 3 days and then it pointed at him and he stood in a field and laughed for a long time and then he cried for a longer time and then he walked home and he stayed." She folded her hands. "He's in the churchyard now. Died happy, which is more than most." Maret looked at the compass. The compass pointed with its relentless, impersonal certainty southeast. "What's southeast?" she asked. "I imagine," Dava said, "that depends on you." The ruins had a name once. It was probably something evocative, something with weight and history, something that people said with the kind of reverence reserved for places where important things had happened. Now people called it the ditch, which told you roughly how the reverence had worked out. Maret arrived at the ditch on the 4th day, because the compass had led her off the main road and onto a track and then off the track and across a moor and through a bog that she felt strongly she should not have had to cross. And if she ever met the person who had originally wronged her, she was going to have some pointed words about their choice of geography. Because that was, she had worked out somewhere around the 2nd day, what the compass was pointing at. Not a place, not a thing, a moment. A moment that had, apparently, occurred somewhere to the southeast of where she'd started, and the compass was pulling her toward it with the humorless insistence of a debt collector who didn't care that you'd had a difficult week. The ruins were a fort, or had been old stone walls, mostly tumbled, with the remnants of towers at the corners. Trees had grown up through the floors. The whole thing had the comfortable, overgrown air of a place that had made its peace with being forgotten and was quietly enjoying the privacy. The compass pointed at the northwest tower. Maret climbed the rubble. She was not a spiritual person. She did not believe in fate or destiny or the meaningful alignment of the universe's events. She believed in bread, in coin, in the specific satisfaction of a well-executed lift. She believed in the body's animal intelligence and the mind's capacity to rationalize anything given sufficient time. She did not believe that a compass could point at a moment. She was, however, standing in the ruins of a tower in the middle of a moor, so she was prepared to update her views. There was nothing at the top of the tower rubble. No object, no sign, no mystical inscription. There was a view which was mostly moor and fog and one very lost-looking sheep. The compass in her hand swung gently, not southeast now, not any direction that corresponded to the face of the compass. It pointed at her chest. She sat down on a piece of collapsed wall and had what she would later describe, if anyone had asked, as a moment. No one asked, because there was no one there, and this was perhaps for the best, because the moment involved a quantity of undignified crying that she would have preferred to keep off the record. The thing about the compass, the thing she had been carefully not thinking about for 4 days, was that she knew what the moment was. She had known on the 1st day, when the needle had settled southeast and her stomach had settled into the particular leaden quality of something recognized. She had known and she had followed it anyway, and she had let herself be surprised by the destination, because that was easier than the other thing. The other thing was this. When she was 16, she had had a friend. His name was Paul, and he was not a thief, which was the first thing she'd liked about him, because she had been surrounded by thieves her whole life and they were, as a category, exhausting. Paul was a carpenter's apprentice. He was terrible at it. He dropped things constantly, and once he had accidentally built a table that was wider at the bottom than the top, which the carpenter had used as a display of what not to do, and which Paul had been remarkably unbothered by. He had laughed about it, actually. He had laughed about most things. He had laughed about the table and about the splinters and about the fact that Maret could pick a pocket faster than he could nail a board. And he had laughed about the future in the way that people laugh about the future when they believe, deeply and without irony, that the future is going to be good. Maret had stolen from him, not much. Not even for any particular reason. It was reflex at first, a coin from his coat left on a chair. She'd told herself she'd put it back. She didn't put it back. Then a second coin because she needed it, genuinely needed it, and she'd thought he wouldn't notice, and he hadn't noticed, which had made it easier the next time. The thing that happened was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. He had found out not through confrontation or revelation, but through the simple accumulation of small absences. He had kept track quietly, with the meticulous patience of someone who wanted very much to be wrong and was checking carefully to confirm it. He had told her what he knew. He had not shouted. He had looked at her with an expression that was not anger exactly and not betrayal exactly, but was the specific look of a person watching something they'd believed in revise itself in real time. He had said, "I thought you were better than this. I thought you didn't do this. Not even, I thought you wouldn't do this to me." He had said better than this, which was the cruelest possible phrasing because it implied that he had believed in a version of her that she had actively, repeatedly disproved. She had left that night. She had become very good at leaving. The compass sat in her palm and pointed at her chest and did not move. "All right," she said out loud, because she had spent 4 days walking across a moor, and she felt that the universe owed her at least the dignity of being spoken at directly. "I take your point. I got it on day 1, actually, which I think you might have noticed if you were paying attention. You could have turned around then and saved us both the journey." Compass did not respond because it was a compass, but the needle stayed steady. "He probably doesn't remember," she said. "It was 20 years ago. He's probably perfectly happy. He's probably built a table that works properly and has a family and has entirely forgotten that I existed, which is the healthy and correct outcome." Needle did not move. "A thief," she said. "I steal things. I stole that compass. I'm stealing it from whoever that man at the tavern was. I'm stealing it from Callum's memory. I'm stealing this moment from you, whatever you are. I'm constitutionally opposed to giving things back." She paused. "I don't know where he is. I don't know if he's alive. I don't know if he'd want to see me." Still steady. "I don't know," she said more quietly, "if it would even be for him if I went back, if I said something. I don't know if I'd be going because I owed it to him or because I wanted him to tell me I wasn't." She stopped. "I don't know if I'm capable of doing something purely for someone else. I don't know if I've ever done that." Needle moved, not to a cardinal direction, not back to southeast. It swung slowly to the northwest, which was, she was fairly sure, back the way she'd come. Back toward Brecken's Hollow. Back toward the tavern where she'd eaten the washing water broth. Back toward the farmer who'd given her a ride. Back toward the city where she'd started, not southeast, where the moment had been, northwest, where the road home was. She did not find Paul immediately. This would have been a tidier story if she had. If she'd walked back into the city and turned a corner and there he was, older but recognizable, and they'd had a conversation that resolved everything and she'd felt the clean, specific relief of a debt paid. Stories liked that kind of thing. Stories had an investment in resolution. Life, Maret had found, had no such investment. Life was more interested in process. It took her 6 weeks to find him. She asked people. She described him poorly. She'd been 16, her memory of his face was impressionistic at best, and got a lot of wrong answers. She found 3 other men named Paul, one of whom was a carpenter, which briefly got her hopes up before she met him and established that he was 70, which seemed statistically unlikely. She found the right Paul by way of a table. specifically by way of a table in the window of a furniture shop that was, improbably, slightly wider at the bottom than the top. Not a defect this time, deliberate she could see, the wood carefully shaped into an unusual and rather elegant taper. There was a small sign next to it that said the maker's name. The shop was closed. She went back the next day. He was older. This was not surprising because so was she, and 20 years tended to do that. He had more lines around his eyes and less of his hair, but the lines were mostly the kind that came from laughing, and he was still, she noted, dropping things. He dropped a mallet when she walked in, flinched, picked it up and turned around. He looked at her. She had prepared a speech. She had spent 6 weeks preparing it, revising it, discarding sections that were too self-serving, adding sections that were more honest, discarding those because they were too honest, arriving finally at something that she felt struck the correct balance between accountability and digestibility. It began, "I know it's been a long time." She said none of it. What she said was, "I stole from you. I knew what I was doing and I did it anyway and I didn't give it back and I've been a thief my whole life and I'm very good at it, but what I was good at with you was pretending it was just a reflex and it wasn't." There was a silence of the kind that has weight. "I know," Paul said. "I know you know." "I meant," he said, "that I know it wasn't just a reflex." He set the mallet down on his workbench carefully this time. "I knew that then. I was angry about it then." He looked at her with an expression that was neither the one she'd feared nor the one she'd hoped for, but was something more complicated and more human than either. "I'm not angry now. I was curious, actually, for a long time whether you'd—" He stopped. "Never mind. Whether I'd what? Whether you'd come back." He said it without sentiment, which was somehow more affecting than sentiment would have been. "I thought you might. You were always going somewhere, even when you were standing still. I thought eventually the somewhere might be back." Maret put the compass on his workbench. He looked at it. "What's this?" "I stole it," she said. "It's what brought me here. I don't know whose it is. I don't know what it is exactly, except that it points at things that need pointing at, and it was pointing at you. At it then." Paul picked up the compass. The needle swung, considered, and settled, pointing, she realized, at neither of them but at the table in the window, the slightly too wide at the bottom table. He laughed, and it was the same laugh she remembered, the one that believed in things. "That's the first table I built on purpose wrong," he said. "The second one. I built the first one by accident and everyone laughed and I went home and I thought, if I could make it look like I meant it, if I could build it so carefully that the mistake became the point." He turned the compass over in his hands. "I did it. Eventually. Took me years." He looked up. "I almost gave up. There were about 4 years in the middle where I almost gave up on everything." "Didn't you?" He set the compass down. The needle swung back to pointing at Maret. They both looked at it. "I don't know," he said. "I just didn't." She did not stay. This would also have been a tidier story, reconciliation, settlement, the clean ending. But she was a thief, and thieves moved. And she had found that when she tried to stay anywhere for too long, she began to feel the specific claustrophobia of a person whose whole life had been built for motion. She stayed for 2 weeks. She helped him move a delivery of lumber, because she was there, and it needed doing, and she had the arms for it. She ate meals that were not washing water broth. She talked more than she was used to talking, about things she was not used to talking about, and discovered that this was less terrible than advertised. When she left, she gave him the compass. "You should keep it," he said. "It's done what it was going to do," she said. "It doesn't point anywhere useful anymore." This was true. Since her conversation at the ruins, since the needle had moved to northwest, the compass had been pointing in a new direction. Not north, not any cardinal direction. Something slightly off, something that didn't correspond to any label on the face. She had worked out, after some consideration, that it was pointing at her. Not in the pointed, accusatory way it had before, not like a verdict. More like a designation, like someone marking a starting point on a map. "Keep it anyway," she told him, "in case it starts pointing somewhere useful again." He took it. She left the city going west, which was not the direction she usually went and was, she suspected, the point. The road was different going west, wider for a while and then narrower and then a path, and then a suggestion, and then just the shape of where a path might be if someone were inclined to make one. She was inclined. She reflected, been walking toward things her whole life, toward the next mark, the next town, the next pocket, the next clean escape. She was extremely good at walking toward things. What she had not practiced, and what she was beginning to think might be worth learning, was walking toward things on purpose, not because a compass said so, not because a needle pulled her somewhere with the relentless gravity of old mistakes, just because she'd looked at a road and thought, "I'd like to see what's at the end of that." The compass, she knew, would still be pointing at her chest if she had it. But she'd given it away, and besides, she thought she'd understood the message by now. You could follow a needle for 1,000 miles across moors and ruins and forgotten towns, and you could blame the needle for leading you there, and you could tell yourself you were being guided by something external, something impersonal, something that had nothing to do with choices. Or you could acknowledge that you'd followed it, that you kept walking, that when it had pointed at your chest you had not thrown it in the bog, and God knew there had been sufficient bog, but had sat down and had a moment and then stood up and kept going. The road went west. Maret went with it, hands in her pockets, the habit of a lifetime, though she was trying to stop checking whether the pockets of the people she passed contained anything worth taking. She was not always successful. Progress, she had found, was less like a straight road and more like the path she was currently walking, forward mostly, with occasional sideways diversions, and the understanding that the destination was less important than the fact that you were going somewhere you'd chosen. She did once on that first day check whether an unattended pack outside a farmhouse contained anything useful. It contained, as far as she could tell, only turnips. She put it back. It was a start. Thanks for listening until the end. Please like and subscribe.